The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the Pharisees, with some scribes who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed. The purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and scribes questioned him. Why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders, but instead eat a meal with unclean hands? Jesus responded, well did Isaiah the prophet prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship, teaching as doctrine human precepts. You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition. He summoned the crowd again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters one from outside can defile that person. But the things that come out from inside are what defile. From within people, from their hearts, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from within, and they defile.
The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? You remember that old riddle. And you also recall that it has no answer. Eggs come from chickens, and chickens come from eggs. It's impossible to produce one without the other. Thus, it's impossible to say which got the process started. But may I offer you another riddle, not quite so perplexing. Which comes first, character or conduct? Do we steal because we are thieves, or do we become thieves by stealing? Do we tell the truth because we are honest, or do we become honest by telling the truth? This morning's gospel touches on these questions. And it revolves around, as you heard, a dispute between Jesus and some of the religious authorities. They had a tradition of cleansing their hands before eating. But the practice had nothing to do with physical hygiene. The cleansing was merely ceremonial. It was part of their religion. These Pharisees believed that eating with unclean hands would make a person unclean inside. Now, Jesus took exception with that. He argued that eating with unclean hands could not make a person morally impure. But then he acknowledged a long list of evil deeds which come from within and do render a person impure. Jesus saw an interaction between conduct and character. They produce each other. The things we do come from within, come out of what we are. But what we are is molded, at least in part, by the things we do. And this is somewhat like the chicken and the egg. Character makes conduct, and conduct makes character. It really doesn't matter which comes first, since we have to deal with both. The church has long recognized a basic flaw in human nature. From the moment we come into the world, there is in all of us a tendency toward selfishness, an inclination toward evil. And sooner or later, no matter how wise and good our training, we will deliberately choose to commit sin. Now, Willie Sutton was an infamous American criminal in the early part of the last century. And he once said of himself, "I'm not a bad man. I'm really a good man who just happens to have a weakness for robbing banks." That, of course, is a very lame excuse. The real truth is that Sutton did not rob banks because he was a bank robber. He was born with a tendency toward evil, just like the rest of us. But he became a bank robber by choosing to rob banks. And the same is true of you and me. Whether our deeds are good or evil, and to a large extent, we become what we do. Now, some of us have grown up in troubled families. We may have lived in an environment that had a very negative influence upon us. We have all been given some bad breaks, some more than others, and these have a powerful influence over our lives. But they are not absolutely controlling. The decisive vote, the choice, is still in our hands. We can decide what we do. And what we do will ultimately determine what we become. This is true both in the realm of good and of evil. In the gospel, Jesus addressed his remarks only to the dark side of life. He said, "All these evils come from within and defile a person." That's certainly true. Just recall some of the evils he mentioned. Adultery. That begins in the heart. But ultimately, people become adulterous by committing adultery, first in fantasy and then in fact. Theft. Again, it begins in the heart with an idea. But people do not become thieves until they start stealing. Deceit. It starts with a perceived need for secrecy and grows with a pattern of misleading words and deeds. And people become deceitful by deceiving. Now, happily, this process also works in the opposite direction. If we can degrade ourselves by shameful living, we can also upgrade ourselves by decent living. Now, this is not to deny the grace of God working in our hearts. Without grace, we would not even want to do better, let alone to be able to do better. The grace of God, however, cannot work without our cooperation. As James said in his letter today, humbly welcome the word that has been planted in you and is able to save your souls. That is to say, we are not saving ourselves. God is saving us. But then James goes on to say, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deluding yourselves. In other words, action is a necessary part of practical salvation. If we want to improve the quality of our lives, we must do something. And the way to become more generous is by acting generously, by sharing your time, your resources, and your skills. Force yourself if you have to, but learn to generously share. Keep on doing that, and it will develop into a habit, a real part of your life, and you will become a more generous person. In most areas of life, we take this practical approach for granted. How do people become good golfers? Most of them get some instructions about how to stand, how to grip the club, how to swing. They may even read some books on the subject. But the bottom line is they become good golfers by playing golf. How do people learn a foreign language? They take classes. They read books. They listen to tapes. The best way, perhaps, is to immerse oneself in a culture where that language is spoken. Put yourself in a place where you have to use it, and you soon learn to speak it. Jesus said, evil deeds defile a person. And that's frightfully true. But allow me to paraphrase it, if you will. Good deeds purify a person. That's also true. So do you want to become a more loving man or woman? There's only one way. Start doing more loving things and watch the result. We become what we do.